wrong with being single? You know, why would
Yeah.
the Apostle Paul have that whole passage about singleness being good for the kingdom? But
Right.
sometimes in American Christianity, I can't speak for every, you know, part of the church in the world, but American Christianity, those are the values we have. And it's kind of like,
Sure.
if you took those values to their logical conclusion, you would kind of have something similar to Handmaid's Tale. So,
Yeah. Well, let's address that really quick, just to start with, because obviously, as I was watching the show, like what is portrayed as Christianity in the show and also in the book, like this does not square with any version of Christianity that any thoughtful Christian would recognize in any way at all, and and in fact it is not actually intended to. And I want to read actually a quote from Margaret Atwood about that. She said, "I don't consider these people to be Christians because they do not have at the core of their behavior and ideologies what I, in my feeble Canadian way, would consider to be the core of Christianity." And she goes on to say, "So faith is a force of good, particularly when people are feeling beleaguered and in need of hope. So you can have bad intentions, and you can also have the iteration in which people have got too much power and then start abusing it. But that is human behavior, so you can't just lay it down to religion." So it's not as though this author set out to trash Christianity by saying, oh, if the Christians were in charge, this is what would happen. Like that's not the purpose of this story. So I think that's something that's important for us to get out, right at the beginning of this, that we understand that what's being portrayed here is like an intentionally exaggerated and cartoonish and like really twisted version of Christianity that is not intended as a real like logical conclusion of what Christian people want to have happen.
yeah, that's good to point out, because with the ignorance of that, people will definitely get the conclusion that she's bashing Christians. So
Right.
that's
Well,
really good.
and this is the problem. I think that, and it is a problem that we sort of have to face, when we're talking about this show, that like I fear that in our culture today, there are a lot of people who are going to see this and are going to say, yup, that's what the Christians want, all right. They hate all of the gays and all of the minorities and everybody who doesn't agree 100% with what they think. And that's just, it's such an awful stereotype of Christianity that's not true, but has come to be so widely accepted by our culture at large. And you and I were talking off mic a little bit earlier before, and I think a large part of that is because of the way that we as Christians can genuinely be kind of legalistic about a lot of stuff, and a lot of what people perceive in Christianity is that it's just a list of rules, and that we really look down on everybody who doesn't adhere to the rules as well as we do, and so we feel ourselves to be superior to them in some way. And that's the perception. And obviously from a consistent biblical standpoint, that's not going to be true. But unfortunately, you have a lot of Christians out there who are not necessarily living in a consistent biblical way in their lives. And so even though this perception is, warped and twisted and not reflective of what the Bible actually, exhorts us to, there is a grain of truth in it.
Exactly. There are enough of Christians who are distorting it, and enough Christians with a voice, giving this perception to non-Christians, which is very unfortunate.
So let's talk about this for a second. I went into I went into watching this sort of assuming, I think, a lot of the things that I think that most Christians would assume, that the show is going to end up saying to us that Christianity just equals the institutions of power that are trying to stay in power at any cost. And that is going to necessarily equate with repression and sexism and misogyny and like all of the terrible things that are present in Gilead, because the really conservative Christians are in power, and so they want these things. Like, I definitely fell into that assumption. It's just sort of by default, because I had a passing familiarity with what the basic storyline was going on here. What was your sort of mindset going into the series here?
I think, as I mentioned before, I feel like I was kind of a student of women's rights. I was beginning to try to learn and research that kind of topic, and then my little sister actually had started watching the series. She probably was only like 1 or 2 episodes in, but she told me about it, and I honestly was not going to watch it. I never watch anything that, like rated R, sexual. Like, I try to stay away.
Yeah.
But she was like, no, it's just like so good, the themes. And I think I was, like you, expecting it to be very like anti-Christian values, like, oh, repression equals always bad. But I think, yeah, that was my mindset. Like, I was ready to disagree.
Yeah. Well, and I was exactly like you. I was not, honestly, the only reason that I did watch the series is because of this podcast. And I felt like, with this platform, like, I think it falls very squarely into the realm of things that I'm going to talk about here. And I think it's worthwhile to engage with, but if not for this, I probably would not have watched it on my own, because, like, as we've said, it's really difficult to get through. There are some profoundly uncomfortable things that happen, sort of in every single episode.
Oh, exactly.
One of the things that struck me so deeply. And I can't remember. Is it in the very first episode where they stone the guy? Oh no, they don't stone him. They bring all the handmaids together to basically like mete out judgment upon this guy who's guilty of rape.
Episode. Yes, I think it might have been the first one.
Yeah, and like
I remember being super impressed with the pilot. Like, how did they fit all this story into this first episode?
Yeah,
I was very impressed with it. But yeah.
Yeah, and all like issues of content aside, like, this is a very, very well produced show. I mean,
yes.
It's extremely well written. It's very, very well acted, and the production values are obviously really high.
Yes.
But but for me, like, that doesn't always equate with a show that I'm willing to subject myself to. Like,
Exactly.
I started watching Breaking Bad because everybody was talking about, and I got like 3 episodes into it, and I'm like, I'm out. I can't do this. This is every bit as dark and sordid as I would expect a show about a drug dealer to be, and this is just not a narrative that I'm interested in engaging with.
Yep. Exactly. I think, what the show does well is that at every episode, I feel like there's a glimmer of hope. Because of, like you said, she acts so well. I'm forgetting her name now, but the main actress.
Offred. Elizabeth Moss.
Elizabeth Moss. And I don't know, she's just everything has to be so subtle in her facial expression, because she has to hide it as her character. She can't show any real emotion, but somehow she communicates it in her face. And I'm just like, how did she do that? But she always has like this kind of rebellious, hopeful attitude, even despite all the oppression. And I'm like, that is what drives the show and makes you want to watch more.
And I want to circle back to actually what I was trying to get to when I started that whole like digression. But that scene where all the handmaids are brought together and they're presented with this criminal, and basically the expectation is that they are going to act as the execution squad. And they basically like beat him to death with their bare hands. And it was a profoundly disturbing scene because it made me realize, it showed me like in this system, like not only do they not have any freedom over their own bodies, but they've also been enlisted to do like the dirty work of their government.
Yeah. Yeah, at first, I feel like I was confused watching. I'm like, wait, what are they doing? Like, they're just like, I don't know, they probably did that on purpose. Like, what is going on? And then, yeah, when you realize what they're doing, you're just, like, in shock. Like, how could they, as if it wasn't bad enough what they're doing to them. Let's just add a little more.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things that I noticed as the series went on is that every single use of scripture that was not taken out of context and that was used in any way that approximates like an appropriate usage was seen as a threat to the governing system. Yeah, at one point, Offred makes the comment of, blessed are those who suffer for righteousness' sake. Because there was this other, they had used like a different part of the Beatitudes as like a mantra to like kind of keep the people downtrodden.
Blessed are the meek is what they used.
Yeah, blessed are the meek, right. And then when she responds at one point with blessed are those who suffer for righteousness' sake, that was such a profound moment because it shows the other side of the coin, right? Because it is totally a possibility that religion can be used as a system of control. When people are afraid and when people are manipulated by religious systems, it can be an exceedingly effective means of controlling people. But when we see the scripture actually being used in its proper way, like it's something that stands in stark contrast and opposition to all of the oppression and repression that we're seeing everywhere else throughout this system that ostensibly is supposed to be, founded on Christian values.
Definitely. Agree with you completely. And even the fact that the writers would recognize, that deeper, like in so many ways, whenever Christians are portrayed in the media, it's so, like, as you said before, cartoonish and so off from what true Christianity, but of all the shows, this show is very, in those rare moments where you get the fuller context of religion as hope, that they had to really understand Christianity in a deep way to put that line in there, like it was impressive.
Yeah. Well, and there were a couple instances of, I feel like it was kind of a token effort towards saying that, Christians aren't like the system of Gilead. You had the image of the priest hanging on the wall, which, sort of indicates that not every religious person is okay with the way that the system is going. You have, in the later episodes, you have the nun who is helping the main character's husband escape. And so there are a couple of things that talk about, that sort of indicate that they're not condemning all Christians, but it's rather a condemnation of this concept of religion as a way to just control people. I feel like these people were shown as, since they were in such a vast minority, and when you're in the flashback scenes, you don't really see people resisting the creep of this authoritarian regime, right? Because in the show you get flashbacks to how things were, before